Welcome to the Weekly Bark, where ordinary people are talking about extraordinary things. Sit back and enjoy the ride. The Weekly Bark. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Weekly Bark. This week I've been I've been just in a deep dive of books. I've been trying to absorb everything that I can get my hands on under the sun. And I don't know what this quest for reading is, other than I've put off reading for a long period of time. And I think now I'm just really back focused on trying to read, to just get back into my reading game. I want to explore more ideas, and I guess also because I'm starting this podcast, I want to I need material, things to say, and what do I want to say about a subject, and I don't want to come off kind of half baked or half cocked or any of that stuff. But on the same token, I also want to maintain the idea that I'm just learning. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anybody has all the answers. And I think anybody who ever comes up to you and says, "I have figured it out. I know the secret and the meaning of life, and this is the path you must walk down," I think I'm always a little skeptical of those people. I think a lot of that becomes a very individual journey. I think that's why we call it a spiritual walk or a faith journey or any of those different things. Or it becomes problematic when we tend to think, "Yes, I've arrived." Anytime in any sort of craft and craft work or um, something, where it's personal development or growth, when we feel like we've attained the goal, we've ended the end prize, um, then it always becomes like where we start to go backwards a little bit. I kind of look at it now, and it's different because when I was a kid, I just wanted to know what hoops I had to jump through. Like when I first, kind of was, exploring religion, I wanted it to be like, okay, I want to check it off like a high school graduation. Okay, what do I got to do? Okay, to hit those marks, perfect. Okay, I'm good. So I'm good now. Now I don't have to worry about this anymore, and I can go on with the rest of my life. And the reality is whether you're in an intellectual endeavor, a spiritual endeavor, or your work, the place of employment. Once you've gotten to the place where you think that you've sort of arrived and there's nothing left to learn, you're either going to burn out, go backwards, or just be miserable and then become disillusioned with that idea. Anyway, I was listening to some people talk, and one of the people I heard talking, they were like, "Oh, I love my home. My home is my safe space," and it got me thinking about this word "safe space." For me, as a Gen Xer, it's a kind of a word that's sort of, I don't know, like we don't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. Like you never heard the word safe spaces. I don't know, 10 years ago. I mean, it wasn't a thing. Or maybe they've been around, but for me, like there was no safe spaces when I was in college, and there's no safe space when I was in school. There was no stress card when I was in the military. So if the drill sergeant was yelling at you, you could wave a stress card and they had to back off. There was none of that stuff when I was growing up. And I don't know, so I think there's some, culture war going on around the term safe space. I think some people have embraced it and think, yes, this is exactly it. And other people fear it because they think that this is a place of exclusion. And so, and I think a lot of people don't really know what the definition of a safe space is because they've never had to deal with it. So then they think of what it is, and then there's an argument. So I had to go look it up. And so and I don't even know if this is the best definition, but this is one of the definitions that I found that seemed to kind of agree with a lot of people online. And basically it was safe spaces originated within the community now known as the LGBTQIA plus, and have since been adapted for use by other marginalized communities. Safe zones or safe spaces are typically for that LGBTQIA plus community, but other marginalized communities have their own versions of safe spaces. Regardless of the name, a safe space or a safe zone are intended to facilitate communication and self-expression without fear of further marginalization. All right, cool. I can stand behind that. I think people, especially people who are in like a group that's not the dominant group, they need those places to kind of come together to feel sort of the embracement and a place where they can be themselves without being ridiculed or having to defend themselves or answer questions and all this sort of stuff. And I love the idea that to facilitate communication with other people. So you go, hey, I don't know anything about your group. What's your group all about? And then it's a place of learning and being open and curiosity and be curious, that kind of thing. And I think that's great. I think where we've crossed a line and we took something that was probably pretty good in its inception and are now kind of moving into an area where it may not be so great anymore is this idea of we need intellectual safe spaces that you can't say something that I don't like or it'll offend me or it's a mean tweet or it's a mean, a mean statement or maybe it's just an insensitive statement. And I think a lot of times we misjudge statements that are insensitive as being mean or ill. And what I mean by that is people say stupid things without realizing they're saying something stupid. And I'll give an example of that. Back when I was in the military, I used to get family photos every year from my family, and every year for the longest time, we'd all go to my grandparents' house, and we'd take a picture and have a family photo, and then we keep that one up on the wall. And then every couple of years we do a new one and we get a new one replaced. And this particular year is, can't remember what year it was, probably 94, 93, somewhere in there. And I was living in Germany, and I was in the barracks and I got the family photo sent over. And I have an uncle who's Chinese, and I know he's Chinese, but we never looked at him like that's my Chinese uncle. That's just my uncle, right? And I had two uncles at the time, Jay and Kai, and I didn't delineate. I mean, I'm not. Don't get me. Don't misunderstand. It's not color blindness that I'm talking about here, but it was just my uncles, and I never thought anything kind of bizarre about that. That's just the way I grew up. That's what I knew. And that was my life. And so I remember we had the photo sitting up on a banister in there. And one of the guys I was, stationed with comes in. He's like looking around, my room, and he looks at the photo and goes, "Oh, cool photo. Is that the family?" I said, "Yeah, sure is." And he goes, "Oh, wow, who's this guy? Is that the gardener?" And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" And he goes, "This guy." And I go, "You mean my uncle?" And it was like this guy couldn't even fathom from his worldview, that there might be a person of color in an otherwise, at the time, all white family as a family member. And while that was horribly insensitive, I don't think the guy was meaning to be as bigoted as that came out. Maybe he was. I don't know. I just want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of it, I just told him what it was. Or I told him, that that's my uncle, and he moved on. We moved on, and it was not a big deal after that point. But I could see where that could be horribly offensive to somebody, and while it was offensive, it wasn't anything lost sleep over, but I've never forgotten it either. And so. But did he need to be counseled? Did he need to be reprimanded? Did he need to be kicked out of the military? No, he's just an idiot. He said something stupid, and I called him out on it, and that was the end of it. And so I think the idea of safe spaces in terms of being a place where you can go and be free of bullying and get, and that where you can kind of go hang out with people who have similar interests or similar backgrounds or similar lifestyles. I think that's a good idea. But when it crosses over into this intellectual frontier and we just want to shut people out, now we're crossing into a line where I don't know that it necessarily works out very well. I like the idea of a place where people can learn, especially if you're not in a marginalized group, you can learn about marginalized groups. Let me give you another example in my life where that kind of happened on accident. When I was at Cal State Fullerton, for whatever reason, I was an English major. I loved those courses, and I'd take all these English classes, and I'd take history as electives. I didn't really realize I was doing it. I just kind of picked classes that I was kind of interested in and that would fit in my schedule. And so history classes were always sort of there. Well, I got a note that I had to go see a counselor. And so I eventually went up and saw a counselor, and they're like, "You need to take something else other than history classes, or declare it a minor or do a dual major, but we're not going to accept any more history courses for your degree because you need to diversify a little bit." I'm like, "Whatever, those are classes I like." And they're like, "Yeah, you need to pick a different class." So I'm like, "Fine." And she had a catalog open. And I remember I just kind of put my finger in there and I picked a class, and it was Chicano Studies. I said, "I'll take this one." And she goes, "That one, you sure?" And I said, "Yep, that's the one I want to take." And she goes, "No problem." So she signed me up for it. It was a class I would have never picked on my own. I didn't know what Chicano Studies was, what was about. I didn't know what Chicano people were. I didn't know or are. I didn't know anything about the word Chicano at all at that moment when I picked that class. And so when I went in and took that class, I was only the only Anglo kid in the class, and but it was a great class. I learned a whole lot about subculture in the area where I grew up in the Southern California area. I learned about Chicano music and the plight of Chicano people, people being between two communities and two worlds. And I learned about Mendez versus Westminster in that class. Now, mind you, I had taken a slew of history classes, and I grew up literally within, I don't know, a 10-mile radius of Westminster my entire life. And I never heard or was taught about one of the single most important court cases for civil rights in our country's history until I took Chicano studies in college. That's a problem. And it was through learning that, and at the time, Sylvia Mendez came in as a guest speaker, so we got to meet her too. So the kid that was behind all that, and her father was the one who brought the case up. And it was through taking a course about a marginalized community and getting out of my own comfort zone that I was able to learn an incredible amount and about this demographic of people that I lived by, next door neighbors to. They were I grew up with Chicano people, and so it turned out to be one of the greatest experiences of my life. But it wouldn't have come on my own accord, and so I think that some of those are the benefits of having these sort of open communities where people that are marginalized can say and teach about who they are and what they are and what they're going through and all of that. And it's a good way to do that. But going back to the negative side of safe spaces, it's intellectual safe spaces. Obviously, it's not a secret that most of social media now is merely getting caught up into an echo chamber, and we get in this echo chamber of like-minded people, and we're getting farther and farther extremist, left or right. It doesn't really matter which side of the political aisle you are on. It seems to me that there's this growing divide, and that moderates like myself are either kind of considered, sellouts, or we're considered, not radical enough one way or the other, and we're becoming more of a group of people without a sort of community. I don't like the idea of box thinking. This idea that we need to ban books. Where did that come from? I mean, we historically, that used to be such an American thing to not do. We should not ban books. We should not ban freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, even if it bothers me, I should defend it to the nth degree, right? And now we're like, no, let's ban some free speech. Let's go ahead and get rid of some of these books. And it's like both sides of the aisle want to ban books, but they want to ban different kinds of books. And it's becoming more and more problematic. We want to cancel Shakespeare, or we want to cancel, LGBTQ books. We want to cancel, these different sort of subject matters and topics. And I think, any book that's worth banning is a book worth reading, in my mind, as many people have said before me. And so I think this is a dangerous place. We do not want this totalitarianism that's going to come from one side or the other when we live in these sort of intellectual safe spaces or echo chambers, because what we end up getting is a new form of bigotry. It's my idea is better than your idea. My religion's better than your religion. My, philosophy is better than your philosophy. And so these things become horribly problematic as far as I can see in the future. And so as I go forward, I'm going to tell you right now, life has been a journey of growth, exploration, and creation, and I'm not done, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. My religious beliefs have only become stronger by reading books of other religions. And one of the things I'm finding out is that all these religions are pretty much saying the same thing. Seek, remember there's a higher power and seek it out, give homage to it. Be good to your neighbor, let love prevail. I kind of came up with a litmus test a while back that, if you're this is how you can tell if you're serving good or evil, right? If you're building, if you're using love as your guidepost, if you're creating, if you're bringing harmony and unity, then you're probably serving God. If you're trying to steal, kill, destroy, tear down, wreck, then you're probably serving the devil. And that's just kind of the way I use it to gauge my life. And I kind of ask myself, which side am I serving today? The other thing too is by getting out of these intellectual safe spaces, and we get challenged. And the only way we can ever get better at anything is by being challenged. It's through the challenges that we grow. And then we can kind of look at our opinions. I want to hear people from a different religion than mine explain to me why maybe they don't like my religion, or maybe why they've chosen the religion that they've chosen. It's a cool experience. I know growing up in a Christian household, we used to have the testimonies where people would come into church and they'd say, they give their testimony on how they found Jesus, and they would always be the same, some or relatively the same. They came from some sort of circumstance and life was not good, and then they found Jesus and life got better, or they were just blessed and they would say that they grew up in a household that was always you know, Christian or whatever, and then they, kind of embrace the faith, and then their life has been good. I got curious one year about, well, do other religions do testimonies? And I found out, yeah, absolutely they do. In fact, almost all of them do. And so I went on this whole sort of internet rabbit hole where I listened to, people who found Islam and their testimony, and it was very similar to the ones that became Christian. And then I listened to people who found Buddhism and their testimonies, and gosh, their testimonies were almost exactly the same, delivered from addiction, delivered from poverty, delivered from abuse, delivered from trauma, find peace, they found unity, they found family, they found culture, all this sort of stuff. And so as I went through all these different religions and I found that they all have testimonies and they all went from being in some sort of tumultuous life to a place of peace, harmony, and growth, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so who am I, or who would I be, or who is anybody for that matter, to tell one person, oh, my book says your book's wrong, so therefore you can't do it. I just don't see that as being true anymore. But it took a long time for that to be challenged. Now I have reasons why I've picked, the path that I've picked and why I stay where I'm at. And I think that's going to be a podcast coming up. And it's basically the premise of it is I'm still working the details out in my head on how to say this right, but it's kind of like why found Christianity, left it, and why I've come back to it at this point in my life. But it won't be. The problem is I'll probably not make a lot of people who are like evangelical happy with my testimony, because I do realize that I think people, I think we've been too narrow-minded in terms of kind of hiding salvation from people, in terms of what they must do. There was a great story I read back in college. It's called "The Problem of Old Harjo," and basically it was a Native American man who had two wives, and he converted to Christianity, heard the gospel, and believed it, but in order for him to make a full conversion, they told him he had to get rid of one of his wives. And the problem is that they were older, um, towards the end of the golden years of their lives. And in the story, he wrestles with this idea because he wants to be saved. He wants to go to heaven. But by doing that, he's going to have to, by not being polygamist and getting rid of one of his wives, that's going to mean the death of that wife. And he can't make that determination. He can't do that. And so he won't. And so he lives out the rest of his life miserable, um, still coming to church and wanting to be part of the community, but not able to being fully embraced in it. Even though one of the nuns that was part of the group was like, wanted to tell him like, you're going to be fine. You're going to heaven. But she couldn't because she was bound by some dogma that was within the religion. So yeah, I think we need to be challenged to grow. I think that helps us grow spiritually. I think we need to remember that we're always on a path. I think we need to grow intellectually. We need to keep challenging our brain with new ideas and concepts. We need to take the things that we believe in, the sacred cows that we think are just so perfect, and we need to hold them up to scrutiny. One of the things that I love about the new generation, and why I kind of laugh during the generation wars that we keep seeing between, was it baby boomers and millennials and Gen Xers, or not Gen Xers, Gen Zers, and all that is this idea that the younger people have said, wait a sec, so let me get this straight. You want me to go to college and go into crippling debt so I can get a job in a building for the best and most productive years of my life, so hopefully in my sickest and most unproductive years of my life, I can retire and then enjoy myself. Yeah, I don't think I want to do that. I think I'm out, and I think that's brilliant. And I don't know why we couldn't, as Gen Xers, come up with it. I have a theory, but I think that's a brilliant critique. One of the things after all this, distance, was with COVID lockdowns and everybody working from home, there's a lot of people that said, you know what, this is pretty cool. I like this. I don't know that I ever want to go back to an office again, and for some reasons. And I don't know that that's a good idea, actually. I actually think we need to go to the office. I think to some degree, we need to be around people. We got to force ourselves to deal with difficult and differing people. I think if we're going to survive as a community, we need to do that. So I'm not so sure that we need to stay in isolation and continue to work remotely. I think it's important that we get paired up with some of these problem people and so forth. But and then so I don't know. I really think I hope we continue, but I think we're going to redefine how we go to work and how much time we're going to spend there and how we're going to do that. And maybe it's a mix. Maybe it's partially going in and partially staying home, or maybe we just do it. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I enjoy the debate of that. The other thing that I see is that this appears to be, mainly a first world problem. I don't see, going back to when I was in the military, I don't see people in other places around the world, complaining about safe spaces the same way we do here in the United States, and maybe like Canada and Europe and places like that. Now, when you live in a place, um, I think the thing is that we are really fortunate on a lot of levels. Even if we don't have, I mean, there's a lot of parts of our society that we can critique and talk about, and it deserves the criticism. It really does. But I think almost every American should get out of America for a while and go live somewhere else if they can. I think every college student, it should be a part of their curriculum, for the most part, that they got to get out and study abroad somewhere and go see how other people in the world live. See what they do. See how society functions where they're from. See how they treat their poor. See how they treat their rich. See how they value people in their society. And then, when you get out, when you get away for a minute and then you come back, then you can see, I think then you have a better opportunity to really critique some of the things of our culture and then do that. Um, I think that's helpful. I think it's really helpful to get our priorities sort of straight, because a lot of times it seems like to me that we argue over some really superfluous stuff. An example of that, another one that I have is, there was a guy named Shane Claiborne, and he wrote a book. I can't remember the book he wrote, but he's part of the Red Letter Christian movement that comes out from the East Coast. He's an evangelist from Knoxville, Tennessee, but he would be part of the liberal side of Christianity, very socially conscious, constantly marching and standing up for different social causes. But anyway, in his book, I think it was during the Iraq War, he decided to go be a missionary over in Iraq and work with some of the Christian groups over there. And I'm gonna give you a pretty poor paraphrase here of this story, but it went something like this. When he gets over there and he gets hooked up with the local, Christian communities, he's kind of like, yeah, what denomination are you guys? They're like, denomination. He goes, we don't do denominations over here. We're Christians in the middle of, an Islamic country. Our survival is at on a thin line on a daily basis. We don't have time to argue over things like you guys do in the States, where things are rather stable. And it blew his mind. It kind of blew my mind too. That, yeah, you're right. People who practice certain faiths in other places where there isn't the religious freedom that we take awfully for granted here, that they don't have time to quibble over the same sort of denominational, idiocracies that we do here. Well, we're X, Y, and Z because we do this, and this group over here, even though they're closely related to us, they're wrong, or they're going to hell even, and that kind of stuff. And it was an eye opener for him that the basic gospel message is what was important about this whole thing, and the dogma, the stuff that we argue about, is really a first world problem, in the sense that it's not the most important part of what the religions are about, or Christianity is about. The most important part of the Christianity you can find in the book of Acts. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? And if so, good, you're part of the club. Your sins are forgiven. Now go be a good person and take care of your neighbor and the widow, the orphan, and the people who are sick, and clothe the naked and feed the hungry, and all those sort of things. And that's it. That's pretty much the end of it. All the rest of the stuff becomes just sort of ritual or whatever. And it's when you take things simply, I think it becomes a lot less things to argue about. I was listening to a guy named Sadhguru talking, and he was like, He was riding his motorcycle. The story he told was that he was riding his motorcycle to this mountain that he loves, and was going there since he was a child. And for him, it was sort of a spiritual place, a place to kind of commune with nature and chill out and just relax. And as he's going up there, somebody had spray painted on the rocks, "I love Jesus." And he's like, "You love Jesus? What about your neighbor?" He goes, and his argument is it's really easy to love somebody who's not right, who you don't have to deal with in person on a day-to-day basis. But what did Jesus admonish you to do? He said, go love your neighbor. He didn't tell you to love him. He said, go love your neighbor as yourself. And he goes, now you do that, then you can be more like Jesus. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's exactly correct. And, so love your neighbor, but that's harder because they're actually there and you have to deal with them and you have to get out of your safe space and deal with an actual human being with an actual personality, with actual thoughts, with actual, feelings, who you may disagree with. You may not even like them, but if you really want to honor the gospel and love your neighbor as yourself, then you need to get out of your safe space and go be with them. Anyway, that's my talk for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out next week. We're going to have a special guest on. And, as life goes on, just remember that we're all on this journey together. The world really is a good place. There are many, many people out here making the world a better place. And all we got to do is go take a look for them. So with that said, I wish you guys all the best. And I will talk to you guys in a week. Take care. God bless you. The Weekly Bark.